All right, well, good morning. Yeah, woo! If you're at home, there's a little bit of clapping in the audience just because the few of us that are here are just really excited to be here. And I know that when we're all together again, we're going to be really excited to be here in this place. But for now, we get to continue to worship in the ways that we have learned to worship, which is primarily at home. Although today I might be not quite as laser focused on the camera as I have usually been. I want to tell you about the time that I was 13 and I did something bad. When I was 13, this game had come out for the computer. In 1999, there was a game that came out called Rollercoaster Tycoon, and it was fabulous. Basically, what this game allowed you to do was build a theme park from nothing. You had very little money, but you quickly acquired it, and you could build roller coasters, customize them, really. You could build them however you wanted to build them. And for the most part, of course, when you're building a roller coaster, the standard thing is to kind of have the cart pull up a hill and drop down and go around a loop and circle back to where it started. But the game was pretty advanced. It had a couple of other options that you could play with. One of them, for instance, was this sort of like rocket propulsion start. You didn't have to be pulled up a hill. You could just basically be on a rocket propeller and just go. And your cart just went right off. And the other thing, too, is you didn't necessarily have to have the track close the loop. What you could do, for instance, is you could build enough track that your cart could kind of go up a hill and then come back down and rest right where it was. But it finally occurred to me when I was 13 years old that if you combine the rocket propulsion and a short track, what would happen? Now, 13-year-old me assumed that the game wouldn't actually let you kill your patrons, so I'm going to guess that it's just going to glitch and kind of put your cart back where it was, but I had to know for sure. So the game lets you put in a whole bunch of advertising dollars into your new attraction, so I did that. I built this new attraction that had a whole rocket start, a very short little jump, and then if the cart was actually going to go off, it was going to go straight into a body of water. I thought that would somehow like cushion the fall or something. It wasn't going to work. So I get this whole thing loaded. There's 12 little pixelized characters inside this little cart, and I let the roller coaster go, and sure enough, it launches them up the ramp. And visually, graphically, the cart moved off the ramp, went in the air, and crashed into the water. I did not know this was the thing the game was capable of doing, and I killed 12 pixelated characters in one moment. I totally annihilated them. I don't know what that makes you think of me and my 13-year-old self. I eventually had to stop doing that, though. Not out of a moral obligation, but apparently the news got out to the press and it hurt my attendance in the park, so I had to very quickly backtrack on how I built my roller coasters. This game allowed me to build a world, build a theme park, build something that was fun. What it didn't do was give me any sense of values. The only rule, really, was amass as much money as you can, but there wasn't anything else built into the park as far as what I should value, what I should focus on. The safety of the people in the park just wasn't a priority. You know, in this season, we have an interesting opportunity. We're going to be doing some world building in a way that, honestly, in my lifetime, I don't think I've ever done. I think that's true for many of you as well. The world changed so fast, so quickly, that nothing is going to quite be the way that it was before. I was reading something with the staff a little while ago, and they said basically crisis expedites change. Things that we might have wanted to change or were trying to resist changing, it didn't matter because the crisis meant we had to. We had to learn to work from home. We had to wear a mask. We had to learn the term social distancing. And we had to do all of these things in a very short span of time because there was a crisis. Now, what health experts are careful to tell us is that we don't want to talk about our post-COVID world because we don't actually know when post-COVID is going to be. This thing may be with us for a long time. But we do know that our world going forward is going to look different than the world before March. In what ways, exactly how, what instances of social distancing or distance learning or distance work, is that going to be part of our society? I don't know yet. We get to build that together. Our community, our culture gets to figure out how to move forward. But we're going to do this whether or not we want to because the world has changed. And now we're going to step into this change. And here, as we talk about the church's engagement in the world, I think there's an opportunity for us because the church is going to change. Not drastically, not in our core mission, not in what we're trying to do and helping other people experience the love of God in their lives, not like that. And soon enough, I hope that we all get together back in this room. But the way we envision church and our calling, specifically in our culture now, it's going to have to take some changes, some flexibility that maybe we didn't imagine a couple months ago. And you know what? That could be a really good thing. I like to think about all the things that sometimes I wish that we could change about our church culture, about my life culture, things that just kind of got ingrained into the system, and now they're just gone. We have a blank slate, a wide open park. We could build whatever roller coaster we want. Hopefully we just don't kill our patrons in the process. But as we're building this world and as we're rebuilding our own personal lives, we're going to have a value set, something to keep in mind, or it's going to end up derailing. I didn't actually mean that as a pun. It's going to end up derailing the entire process. Because something has to guide our world-building focus. Something has to guide us when we rebuild our personal lives, when we refill our schedules and realign our priorities and jump into whatever is going to happen in the next couple of months. If we do not have something that's going to guide us, help us stay focused, we're going to build the wrong roller coaster. And the results could be disastrous. So we're starting this series that we're calling Won't Stop Now. And this series really is focused on this idea the church never did stop. It might be true that we didn't get to gather in the church building for a little while. That part's true. But the church and its mission and how we love people, that never stopped. In fact, we've gotten to do some really creative things. We've gotten to reach people we've never gotten to reach before, all because the context around us changed. Church did not stop, and we are not going to stop going forward. We are going to, however, learn some lessons. We're going to think about the kinds of things that God has done over the last couple of months, the kinds of things that might inform a new reality for us, a new way of envisioning our community together. Not every element's going to be different, but we're going to learn. We're going to move forward. We're not going to look backwards. We're going to say, what is God doing now? What has God taught us? And how can we be a part of that? So this morning, we're going to look at Deuteronomy Chapter 6. I invite you to turn there in your Bibles or on your phone, whether you're at home or in the room right now. That's where we're going to be focused. The series isn't based out of Deuteronomy. We're going to be looking at a lot of different things as we go throughout this series. But today, I want to look at Deuteronomy 6, because there is a world-building process here. We'll read verse 1. It says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess." Now, here's what's going on. Moses knows that his time with the Israelites are short. And he knows the next big thing on the agenda is that the Israelites are going to cross the Jordan into the promised land. And he's not going to be there with them. This is going to be something where the next generation of Israelites, they're going to have to figure out how to build a new life together. I mean, everything's going to be different. This is a generation where all they knew, all they understood was life in the desert. That was their reality. Their ancestors knew slavery. It got them out of slavery. But now this generation knows life as nomads. They wander from place to place, trying to figure out what God is going to do next. Now, they're going to inherit the promised land. They're going to build a new world. They're going to build cities, and they're actually going to stay there. It's a wide open theme park. Everything's available to them. But Moses, knowing he's not going to be there with them, wants to give them some words of advice before they go. Because if you're going to build a world, you have to understand what your focus is, or you're going to end up with all sorts of weird roller coasters. So that's what Moses wants to teach his people today. Look at verse 2. "So that your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life." These decrees are going to have the effect of giving them prosperity in the land that they are going to. One more verse here, verse 3. "Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you." This has been a long time in coming. And after a lot of years of wandering around the desert, the Israelites are going to have their opportunity. God promised this opportunity. The question was going to be, were they going to be faithful with that opportunity? When they built their new world, they built their new country, built their new lives, would God and his decrees and his commands be their focus? Just prior to this chapter, you actually have a repetition of the Ten Commandments. In chapter 5, you get this. you have all of what was given to Moses essentially on the mountain. And Moses now, he's repeating these commands back to Israel, saying these commands, they really matter. There's some good ones in there, things that I probably should have learned from when I was 13, like do not murder. But at its core, there's something so central, so foundational, that Moses is going to state it now in the next 2 verses. And I can't really overstate how important these next 2 verses are to the understanding of the Israelite faith community. They meant everything. To this day, these next 2 verses form the cornerstone of how many Jews understand their worship of God. It's so important that literally this next verse is the only verse I had memorized in Hebrew because my Hebrew professor would not let me graduate without memorizing it. It goes like this, verse 4, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You have to get that weird sound that I can't quite do right in my throat. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. One God, one focus. This is what you need to know before you go into this land. God is everything. There's nothing else. This is your focus. And he goes on to say, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. If you're familiar with the New Testament, you know this verse because it comes up again with Jesus when he says that this is the greatest commandment. And of course, Jesus adds the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself, because the two are tied. When we love God well, when God is our focus, our community is going to look out for each other. We're going to care for each other. We're going to prosper because we know what this world is that we're building. This is everything, and we cannot forget it. These 2 verses, they form what is called the Shema. That's that Hebrew word they started with. It means listen or hear, Israel. This is what it's all about. As we go into this world-building process together, as we go forward and move into this next stage of life, whatever it brings, these are the truths that must guide us. And they're so important to Moses that he doesn't want to end with just stating them. What he wants to remind us is that these are truths that we have to come back to time and time again. Look at the next 3 verses. Verse 6 says this, these commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. These are commands that are supposed to stay with you. So what can happen sometimes is, especially in a church setting, right, we can sing songs about who God is and we can give God the glory, but it's very possible to sing a song while our heart is cold. We can do that. We can say one thing about what we believe, why it hasn't permeated our whole being. Because the truths about God, they can't just exist out there. They have to penetrate our heart. They have to stay there. And Moses wants to help us do that. So starting in verse 7, he gives a whole list of how we might keep this thing in our hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Symbols are powerful. Truths are powerful. If I had this in February, you would wonder what was wrong with me. It would make no sense to you if I was to put this thing over my mouth. What are you doing? Are you sick? Do I need to be concerned about you? Do I need to get you to a hospital? But today, I can hold the mask up and you all know what it means. That mask isn't just an instrument, it's a symbol. I mean, if they were to write out 2020 and had to choose a symbol to put next to it, I would choose the mask. Because here's what the mask means. The mask means that we live in fear of a virus. The mask means that as a society, we've taken steps to try to combat this virus. The mask means that as a society, we've had to break down all of our other structures and institutions. Businesses have had to close. Churches have had to go to stuff that's online because we want to combat this virus. Not all bad. But it also means some loneliness, some isolation, some grief, that things that we wanted to do, we couldn't do now because so many of our plans and activities got canceled. It means every day when I go to the grocery store and I see someone wearing a mask, I'm reminded about the crisis that we're currently facing. When I talk to my children, we have to think about COVID. When I sit at home and when I walk along the road and when I lie down and when I get up, I'm thinking about COVID. When I wear this mask, literally tying it to my face, I'm thinking about COVID. When I enter people's homes and we can't quite figure out whether we should handshake or fist bump or what, we're thinking about COVID. It permeates our lives. And this symbol, it matters. It changes the way we interact with each other. And I see this everywhere I go. I see this in the room today. I'm reminded about a very present reality. But Moses never wanted us to focus on things like COVID. It didn't exist in his time, but it wouldn't have mattered. He said that's important to address, but that's secondary. The stuff that's going on in your life is important to address, but it's secondary. Here's what I want you to focus on. Here's what I want you to impress upon your children and to think about when you sit up and when you lie down, when you're out on the streets or when you're in home. Here's the things I want you to fully adhere to your bodies and your homes. I want you to know, Hear, O Israel, that the Lord is one, and you are to love him with all of your heart, soul, and strength. That is the daily reality I want you to live in. And that should change all of our relationships with each other. And that truth is much more potent than any piece of cloth. I want to break this down. I want to look at some of the individual pieces. All right, here's the first one. Impress them on your children. You know, for Emma, she's pretty young at this point. It's very hard to actually have a conversation with her about the virus. It's very hard to have a conversation with her about God sometimes. Although this is great recently, she has learned that every time we sit down for dinner and we do this, she now, before we even sit down, will do this with her hands. Like she's expecting us to pray before we eat. She has no idea what we're doing, but she caught this symbol, right? I'm actually not terribly great at it, but my wife is pretty good about finding small moments to infuse the love of God even into this little tiny life that can't fully understand it yet. We have a call to impart the wisdom of the truth of who God is and the importance of God in our lives to our children. And I'm excited to learn about the ways I'm going to do that with Emma in the future. But I know for many of you, you struggle with this because your kids' attention, honestly, it's taken other places. And that's okay, it's a lot of good stuff, but here's the great thing. All those good things, they just came to a crashing halt recently. Why there's a lot of grief with that. This gives us a chance to help our families rebuild a structure in which God is the centerpiece. It doesn't mean that we don't go back to participating in sports or AP classes. It's just that I assure you that I've never taken an AP class, I've never taken any class of any sort where I was told to go home and read the Bible more and deepen my relationship with God. You know, it's not the way that it goes. That's not the homework assignments. That's not what's going to happen in those classes. Your sports teams aren't going to say, take this week to go enjoy some time alone with God. That's not how it goes. Parents, you're the defenders of your kids' faith journey. You're the only ones who can build into their systems and structures a life with God. Because none of the other structures around you will do it for you. In fact, they're going to take the time for other things. And they're good things, they're important things. But it's going to be up to you to impress upon your children the urgency of loving the Lord your God with all your soul, heart, and strength. And then we see this at the second half of verse 7. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. You know, actually, this is kind of interesting. We belong to a friend's church, and so our theology in the past has sometimes had a hard time with what we call the Sacraments, specifically when it comes to baptism and communion. And really that just it comes from this idea that like a lot of times those things just get used as kind of rote machine stuff. They don't really have a heart benefit. People sometimes just got in the motions, especially when the friends were first developing. And so they didn't want to do things that really had no meaning whatsoever. Today we can do it with lots of meaning, and our church does both of those things in different contexts. But here's really how friends view sacraments. And by sacraments, I mean things that are set apart and sacred, things where time is dedicated specifically to God. Baptism or communion, those things can be separated for God. But you know what could also be separated for God? That moment when you wake up in the morning and that moment when you lie down. The times where you're at your home, we got a lot of those these days. And hopefully coming up soon, the times where you're in the streets. All of those moments can become sacred when they're infused with the truth that our Lord is one. When we live out in our daily activities the belief that God really is the center of everything. In those moments, everything changes. it's different. Even if we're doing some of the same activities, we're doing them with a different desire to help people understand the love of God, day in and day out. Now, this next one is interesting. I mentioned this with the mask, right? You can actually tie a mask to your face. And so verse 8 has some things like this. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. It's actually difficult to figure out exactly how literal this verse was to be taken, but people have taken it quite literally. There's actually a practice still in use today of people taking down the Shema Yisrael we read a few verses ago, writing on parchment, putting it in boxes, and literally wrapping it around your arms to fulfill the commands of this verse. And maybe that seems a little bit like letter of the law kind of thing, but here's the deal. When you're doing that, when you have that attached to you, you can't help but remember that God is with you. The Lord is with you. If you're going to carry around a little piece of the testimony of God with you, it's a lot harder than to hate your neighbor. Because when you have that symbol with you, you're declaring the truth about who God is. As Christians, of course, we have a different symbol that we use more readily, and that's the cross. A lot of people will use crosses, place them on their neck. We'll see that as picture frames in their homes, something like that, a symbol that honestly, if you have a cross in your possession and you're simultaneously not caring for the needs of your neighbor, you're living a contradiction. Because that cross is a symbol that reminds us of the truth that God is one, and then in the Christian tradition, we go further and say God loved us so much that he died for us, for everybody. And we could share that love with everyone else around us. Symbols are powerful. Now, I don't want to take too much liberty with the text here, but this is what this made me think of. This is more word association than good Bible interpretation. I'll warn you about that up front. But these are things that your hands and your forehead, it goes with you everywhere, right? So everywhere you go, these are things that follow you. I can really only think of one thing that follows me right now with kind of the same determination as this, and that's my cell phone. What if every time we took our cell phone out and we opened up social media accounts, we approached it with, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength before we press send on anything that we posted? Would that change the way that we interact with each other? Would that change how we love the people around us? Because God is with us always. And this last one, this would have been really good for me when I built my roller coaster. If I had actually taken this and put this on the gates of my roller coaster, and especially the do not murder people thing, this would have worked out a lot better. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. When people come into your places of living, they should know that there's something different about this place. Now, whether or not you actually hang a sign or write it on your home, that doesn't matter as much to me. What I hope is that when people step into your place of living or your spheres of influence, they feel the love of God in that place. Because that home is built on the idea that God is everything and that God is our focus. And people could feel that when they step in. We have to keep coming back and reinforcing this message because there's so many other messages that can compete with us, right? Like in my roller coaster game, the main message was make a lot of money. That's definitely one of them. Other messages are acquire power or comfort. These things can become our focus much more quickly sometimes than remembering to hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. They're tempting messages. And so we have to go to great lengths, like we saw in these verses, to remind ourselves about what our focus truly is, especially as we rebuild a world. It changes everything. Now, Moses, he wanted to show the people something that was really important for them to remember, because here's what was going to happen, right? They're going to go into this new land. There's going to be cities that are already there. They're going to have a lot of wealth that they're going to very quickly acquire. They're going to have a lot of blessings that they're going to get to enjoy. That's all great. Sometimes we can be distracted by the very things that God blesses us with. I want you to look at verses 10 and most of 12 here. I'm going to skip verse 11 for a minute. We'll come back to it. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give you, we're skipping verse 11, then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Now this was a real concern for this generation. Not all of them had lived in slavery. Their ancestors had. This group had wandered the desert for a long time. They had to remember that God had delivered them in the past, because when they're coming into this new place, they have to remember who God is, or they're going to mess this whole thing up. They're going to build the wrong world. They have to remember who God is, okay? This is where verse 11 comes in. I'm going to swap it out, and you're going to see verse 11 here. When you go into this land, that God's going to give us, that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build. Houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide. Wells that you did not dig. And vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. When you're going into this land and you're going to experience all of the blessings of what is there before you, you must remember this: none of it was because of you. This wasn't your own effort. This is something that God is giving you. Now, it's not to say that Israel wasn't going to be part of the world-building process. They were going to be there. They're going to be building up these cities they're going to inherit. They were going to be active participants in this. But the core of it, the blessing, all of it came from God. It wasn't theirs to hold or to claim. Whatever life is like going forward, whatever good things come our way going forward, these are blessings of God. Now, we have a role in helping those blessings come to fruition, but they're God's blessings in our lives. And if we ever forget that, then the mistake that we're likely going to make is that we're going to choose to focus more on the blessings than the one who blessed us. Go back to verse 12. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When you're enjoying all the good things that God has given you, when you're enjoying the fruit of the land that you have built, when you're enjoying the most awesome roller coaster that Chris Conway has ever made, remember, it's the Lord who brought you out of Egypt and out of slavery. It's God. Always has been. And in your pursuit of more blessings, do not forget the core. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Never forget that, even in the days of plenty. Because that's how you go down a path of destruction for sure. It's all about God. It always has been. A God who loves us enough that he gives us good things. That in many ways he blesses our lives. A God who loves us enough that even when things are hard, he is there with us. A God that we want to follow in every step that we take. I'm going to invite the praise band back up. We're going to sing a song, and part of the bridge is, I will build my life. I will build my life on the promises of God, on who God is. And that's important, because we have some building to do. We're going to have to rebuild our relationships, the way that we interact with people. Some of us are going to have to rebuild our careers. Goodness knows, our economy looks different. It's not going to be the same. How we work is not going to be the same. Some of us are going to have to learn to navigate stuff that's in person and online. Some of us are going to have to renegotiate how we even understand our commitment to faith and church and how we engage with this community here. Some of us are going to have to realign our priorities and our hobbies and the things that give us joy in life, and that's all good too. All of these things we're going to rebuild, but we're going to do it together, and we're going to do it with the focus that, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And when we rebuild these things, we will do it even as we love the Lord our God with all of our soul, heart, and strength. This is what it means to build a world focused on God. With everything that comes next, whatever it may be, God will be at its center. Lord, help us not forget who you are. Help us not forget your truths, but guide us into a world in which you are our focus, in which as we rebuild everything around us, that God, we do with you in mind, so that you may be given the glory. In your name we pray. Amen.